is the way forward for Ukraine following the NATO Summit in Ankara? We've seen brutal Russian missile attacks in Kyiv, and in Turkey there was a plea for help from President Zelenskyy. When it comes to air defense, he said, we need our partners' determination. Kyiv's message is clear. It wants the fastest possible delivery of Patriot interceptor missiles. So how did that message go down? A warm welcome to the Kyiv Security Forum discussion, a deep dive here, as we often do, as we delve into the substance, the politics, as European rearmament and burden sharing remain centre stage. Top of the bill, as I mentioned, was President Zelenskyy in Ankara urging allies to provide air defence systems to protect Kyiv after Russian attacks that have seen over 50 civilians killed in the Ukrainian capital in less than a week, while Russia's ballistic missiles demand an answer. So could a homegrown missile defence system be on the cards? Ukrainians have proved time and time again that they can look after themselves. And what a pivot it has been in over 4 years and 4 months only, all the while constantly under attack. Ukraine is now a provider of security for the NATO alliance. Imagine that. Ukraine has carried out long-range drone and missile attacks against Russia, hitting oil refineries, military targets, causing significant fuel shortages and power cuts. So, with the entire world watching what's going on in Ukraine, both its friends and enemies, people are asking the following questions. Is the NATO alliance alive? Does America's bond with Europe remain strong? There's been a step up in defense spending since last year's NATO Summit, but President Trump says he's very disappointed with NATO. As Ukraine remains center stage for Europe, with the US seemingly focusing elsewhere, be it Iran or Greenland, will we see NATO finally strengthen its defenses? Well, let me introduce you now to our accomplished, sharp and brilliant panel spanning Ukraine, NATO, the US and Europe. First of all, I'm Mark Lobel. I'm a journalist and a presenter. Now we have Arseniy Yatsenyuk, chairman of the Kyiv Security Forum, and former Prime Minister of Ukraine. Welcome, Arseniy.
Hi.
Great to see you. Tanya Hartman is joining us, head of Policy East at the Political Affairs and Security Policy Division at NATO. And Tanya, with responsibility for Ukraine and Moldova, I understand.
That's correct.
Great to see you. Danylo Lubkivsky, former Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine and Security Council member at the Kyiv Security Forum. Great to have you on the panel too. Welcome, Danylo. How are you feeling?
So far, so good. Hi, Mark.
We're also joined by Ambassador Kurt Volker, former US Special Representative for Ukraine. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. And everyone, good to see you.
Great to see you, and one ambassador never enough for us. Ambassador William Taylor joining us too, the former US ambassador to Ukraine and a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council. A warm welcome to you, Ambassador.
Well, thank you, Mark.
And Marcin Bozansky, Executive Director of the Kyiv Security Forum's EU office in Brussels. Marcin, great to see you.
Great to be with you, and a warm welcome from Ankara.
Well, let's start with what's going on in Ankara. The summit there is expected to deliver on key priorities, an increase in defence spending and production, a renewed commitment to Article 5, NATO's collective defence pact, and that key element for us, long-term security assistance for Ukraine. So let's begin with Tanya Hartman. Tanya, NATO has a lot to prove right now. So let's just begin with your main conclusions from the summit, and particularly those decisions that you think affect Ukraine the most.
Thanks very much. We're having this conversation just as the summit is concluding. So hot off the press, some important observations and conclusions from my side about the summit, about the main discussions that were had in the support for Ukraine. And in my view, this has been one of the most consequential summits that we have had in a long time. Last year at The Hague, we took important decisions, important commitments. And this was the year when we demonstrated action, we demonstrated that we were delivering, that we were actually showing what we were accomplishing. And the conclusions are these, and I have a few. One, NATO is stronger than ever. We are building more, we're buying more, we are procuring more, we're delivering more. And NATO's deterrence and defense are stronger than they have been in a very long time. And we are ready, both in terms of political will and the capabilities, to defend all allies and every inch of alliance territory. Also, another important conclusion is the unwavering support and commitment to Ukraine. Not only in the just announced commitment to provide 70 billion of support in training, equipment, and other capabilities for Ukraine in 2026, but also a commitment to do the same next year so that we can keep Ukraine in the fight now, we can protect the Ukrainian people from the onslaught and the attacks that you yourself have just described, and that we also prepare for Ukraine's security for the long term. So this has been one of the most important decisions of the summit about the essential support for Ukraine. Another important conclusion is that Ukraine is now a security provider and that Ukraine contributes to all of our security. So doing more with and for Ukraine is absolutely essential, not only for NATO, but for Ukraine as well. So more Ukraine, more NATO, more commitment, more capabilities, more security.
And are the allies learning from Ukraine this deep precision strike project, a pledge of $50 billion over the next 10 years from 12 countries, including the UK, on a new long-range missile to protect Europe? Is NATO now sending out a slightly different message to the world?
I think NATO is sending out a consistent message about how our security is interlinked and how much Ukraine is contributing to all of our security. And we've seen this very much over the past year in particular, but even before, about how Ukrainian experience on the battlefield, Ukrainian capabilities across many different areas, including counter-drone, are contributing not only to NATO's security, but also other partners' security. So other partners of Ukraine and of NATO are also benefiting from Ukraine's experience.
Okay, thank you, Tanya, so much. Let's turn to Arseniy Yatsenyuk. Wow, one of the most consequential summits we're there hearing from Tanya. It's a pity that you couldn't be there, Arseniy, but as I understand it, Russia's reissued an arrest warrant against you, and there might be extradition matters keeping you away from Ankara. That's perhaps why you weren't able to get out there. But do you wear that as a badge of honor?
Well, correct. Russia issued another arrest warrant, but that's not an issue right now. Let's better elaborate on the NATO and on the outcomes of this NATO summit. Tanya, thanks.
Well, you went into this NATO summit with many expectations, no doubt, Arseniy. Were they met?
Well, I wish the time will come when we will really have the most consequential and historic NATO summit. This is the time when Ukraine is to join NATO. We started this process in 2008. As a Speaker of the House, I asked the NATO member states to provide map for Ukraine. And it's been practically for 18 years that we are dragging our feet. But the thing is that NATO did an unbelievable thing for Ukraine. You folks support that, and you actually bear the brunt of both financial and military support to Ukraine. We are fighting against Russia for at least 12 years. And Putin didn't manage to take over Ukraine, and he would never take over Ukraine. But the thing is that right now, what is needed for the Ukrainian people, we urgently need air defense systems. We urgently need the weapon of deterrence, which is a long-range and long-distance missiles. And look, it's a real disaster. You know, every single night they are pummeling Ukraine. And the last night, I can tell you that there was no even air raid sirens. So first, we've heard the missiles that landed in Kyiv, and only afterwards, in 2 minutes, the air raid sirens started to sound. So my message to our NATO allies is we are grateful for the support, and we will win this war in case if we first turn the screw on Russia, and second, if we ramp up our production facilities and provide both missile defense systems to Ukraine and licenses, and we asked our American friends to provide licenses to produce both missile defense systems and long-range missiles in Ukraine. These, I believe, are the outstanding issues right now for the Ukrainian people.
Really important issues there, particularly about the US role, which I'll pick up in a second with Ambassador Volker. But let me just pick up on a point you made there, Arseniy, about NATO membership and turn to Ambassador Taylor. Ambassador Taylor, if the US is reducing responsibility for Europe's security, which seems to be the trend here, should it reconsider its opposition to Ukraine's NATO membership? As Arseniy was saying there, denying membership's not going to persuade Putin necessarily to end this war anyway. His objectives seem to be much larger than NATO enlargement.
Absolutely, Mark. There's no doubt that the United States, as well as the rest of NATO, ought to welcome Ukraine. As you've pointed out, and as Tanya pointed out, Ukraine is providing security. Ukraine is defending. Ukraine is doing what NATO was formed to do, that is defend Europe against Russia. So yes, it should. I would recall, Arseniy has already talked about 2008. At that time, the United States fully supported Ukraine going into NATO, the membership action plan that Arseniy and others had suggested. And I was there with Arseniy in Kyiv at that time, and we were strong supporters of Ukraine being in NATO, joining the alliance, starting the membership action plan, and other nations opposed at the summit. However, that demonstrates that U.S. policy can change. And I think U.S. policy can change again. And yes, we should support Ukraine joining NATO.
Right, and I guess Arseniy is kind of asking for it to be sooner rather than later. Ambassador Taylor, while I've got you there, very good question really that's coming out of this summit, and I was wondering whether you're concerned whether the Russian-made S-400 air defense systems and NATO's F-35 jets operating in the same country, namely Turkey, if that is an outcome of this summit, might be a problem because the Russian system could collect this valuable electronic data about the F-35's stealth characteristics and make it less of a potent weapon.
You're exactly right, Mark. That's a terrible idea to have them in the same system. The Turks should not get the F-35s until they get rid of the S-400s, which they've talked about doing, and they're talking about ways of sending them to other places, maybe sending them to Ukraine. But I understand that in order to remove these S-400s from Turkey, the Russians would have to agree. Unlikely. All to say that they are incompatible in the same system. So no, the Turkey should not yet get the F-35s.
All right, so a pause on that from your point of view. Let's turn to Ambassador Volker now. Thanks for those answers. Ambassador Volker, how do you assess the role being played by the American delegation? It was just last month that U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was announcing a 6-month review of the presence of U.S. forces in Europe. What more do we know now?
Sorry, I muted myself. We have two levels of conversation going on. The first is what you're referring to, Secretary Hegseth, occasionally President Trump, J.D. Vance, where they're making political statements about their unhappiness with Europe from time to time. And sometimes those statements are paired with, oh, we'll move 5,000 troops out of Germany, or we won't send these troops to Poland, or we're going to cut our presence in Europe by a third. And it's that kind of political level rhetoric that we hear a lot of and that people react to. They don't like hearing it sometimes. The reality is something quite different. The reality is that the U.S. military constantly reviews its force posture based on what the perceived threats are, what the missions are that they need to carry out, what our projections are going forward, where we think they are best located to carry out those missions, and against the backdrop of trying to rebalance so that the U.S. does relatively less and Europe does relatively more. And that process goes on all the time and takes time. You make a precipitous move in troop withdrawals, it costs a lot of money and it leaves some vulnerabilities. But if you plan it and you're looking 6 months ahead, a year ahead, you do it as part of your rotations and you're covering the missions as you go, that's normal business and actually pretty good. So I was, in a way, I was reassured when Secretary Hegseth said we're going to have our 6-month force posture review, because that's the right way to do things, as opposed to the high-level petulant rhetoric.
Well, that's a measured approach, isn't it? Whereas when we look at the meetings between Presidents Trump and Zelensky, they have been quite wild in the past. I know you've been monitoring closely one going on at the moment. What's the body language like? What are we expecting to come from this?
Yeah, it was very interesting watching President Trump and President Zelensky in Ankara today. The body language was quite good. President Trump says he likes President Zelensky. That's important for him to say because it's a signal to the MAGA world and a signal to people who are not sure whether they should support Ukraine or not. Coming from President Trump, that will steer them a little bit. He also complimented Ukraine on its military response, its capabilities, determination, the people of Ukraine. Talked about Ukrainians in Poland wanting to go home, which he admired. So very positive body language there. And I have to say on President Zelensky's part as well, in contrast to that meeting in the Oval Office a year and a half ago that we all remember, he was right on point, very disciplined, knew how to use that time in public with President Trump and saving the detailed discussion for their private meeting to follow. I thought that was all handled very well.
Okay, so it sounds pretty positive at the moment from how you've been reading it.
Yeah.
Danylo, our minds are taken back to the Kyiv Security Forum a few months ago, where the theme that really came out of there was the need for European resilience in light of Russia's ambitions and an unreliability from the US, which we've just been describing. Many words there. We've heard from Tanya that we have now got action in Ankara. So how do you assess the overall picture of security trends in Europe and what should be done next?
Thank you, Mark. I'd like to begin with the point that has already been mentioned here. It's, in a nutshell, it's Ukraine's membership in NATO that will put an end to this war. And this is not merely a slogan or rhetorical line that makes people uncomfortable. It goes to the heart of this war. Russia launched this war to rewrite Europe's security order. Let us remember Moscow's ultimatum of December 2021. Russia demanded that NATO withdraw its forces from across Eastern Europe. It wanted to turn Ukraine into a military bridgehead from which it could intimidate Europe, divide the alliance, and ultimately prepare for further aggression against NATO. Ukraine has destroyed that strategy. Today, Ukraine is doing far more than defending its own territory. We are strengthening the security of the Baltic region. We are making a direct contribution to Poland's security. Our operations in the Baltic Sea demonstrate that Ukraine can disrupt Russia's military capabilities well beyond the battlefield in Ukraine. In the most literal sense, Ukraine is defending NATO's security space, and not only that of our immediate neighbors. Every day, Ukraine is making a strategic investment in the security of Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The massive Russian attacks against Kyiv and our other cities are acts of frustration by Russia that has failed to defeat Ukraine on the battlefield. Unable to defeat Ukraine militarily, the Kremlin is trying to break the alliance. It exploits anti-Ukrainian narratives to divide Poland. It plays on short-sighted nationalism and domestic political calculations in Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic. It supports both the far right and far left in an effort to weaken Germany and France. And it seeks to manipulate President Trump and political debates in the United States to undermine American leadership and transatlantic unity. This is the broader battlefield, and that's why the NATO summit in Ankara matters. The most important message from Ankara, in my opinion, is that the allies have preserved the unity. But unity must now be translated into action. Protect Ukraine's skies. Provide Ukraine with the military capabilities needed to break Russia's ability to wage this war. Recognize a simple reality. Ukraine has bought Europe time to rebuild its defense. Now Europe must use this time wisely. America must return. Ukraine has waited too long for Witkoff and Kushner. The time has come to stop playing games. The world expects the United States to exercise meaningful pressure to deter Russia. And ultimately, this should also be the principal message to China ahead of President Xi's visit to the United States this autumn. I want to believe that the NATO summit in Ankara will be remembered as the summit that brought change for the better.
Yeah, thank you for that, Danylo. Really clear. Marcin, listening to Danylo there, one really reflects on the change since the Kyiv Security Forum back in April and how Ukraine appears to be really on the front foot, but how the solidarity of allies at that crucial summit in Ankara, where you are, is pivotal to maintaining the momentum. So what is the mood like where you are right now in Ankara?
Oh, thanks very much. I hope you can hear me well. It's been quite dynamic around here. But look, I think first and foremost, a very important message, and this is coming straight from now the press conference of President Trump and Zelenskyy. President Trump has officially given a green light for Ukraine to produce Patriot missiles in Ukraine, which is a big, big message coming, and I think something that everybody was hoping for. We have it now, so definitely a big, strong success for Ukraine, having that statement made along President Zelenskyy by President Trump. It also seems that it's been quite clear that what Ukraine has been achieving through their long-range attacks in Russia is strengthening Ukraine's hand towards negotiations. And Trump said that he believes Zelenskyy is effective, and he believes this will bring us closer to a potential peace deal, which is also a good and strong message. So I think two strong messages which are important considering what Ukraine was looking for from this summit. Also to add, the atmosphere. The body language was certainly good, and this is also a positive element. I think overall the atmosphere of the summit is first. It is consequential. It is important. I have a feeling we have really three summits here in many ways. One, and this has been a clear-cut success in my opinion, is on the defense industry collaboration, which has been really, really improved, and on defense industry financing and innovation, with several commitments being made, new formats emerging, different countries cooperating, building defense systems for the skies, which will also include Ukraine, financing for automation, for drone technology, and looking at bringing Ukrainian experience into this process. So there was a lot of talk. The Defense Industry Forum was forefront here, and this was certainly very important. Now, on the unity of the alliance, this is something that is coming into the communiqué, which is also very important after a turbulent moment with President Trump, which we've also seen and which everybody was worried about. In the end, he came out backing the full unity of the alliance, and that was clearly an important message. And the third part, considering the longer-term support for Ukraine, I think this was a very, very clear message that the money is going to keep flowing, even if it is not as much additionally to press Russia, which the opportunity is for now. It is still very, very strong, and Putin sees this. And also, importantly, I think the commitment for collective defense is super important now, because what Putin is trying to do, he's trying to now, do the fear-mongering that he might attack other countries. This is a lot of chatter through intelligence services right now, and it's not, by mistake. Putin sees that he's got an upper hand to bombard with ballistic missiles at the moment Ukrainian cities, and he doesn't want those Patriot missiles coming from other countries because they'll be afraid he might attack. But and this is not public, but with the chatter we are getting here, this movement is starting to happen from a number of countries. It happened recently from Poland, which, through something Mikola mentioned, this idiotic nationalistic sort of debates has been made public, but this is happening from other countries too, and it's an important mark. So I think from these perspectives, it's been a successful and good summit. Obviously, a lot of issues on the transatlantic still agenda remain. One point I'd like to add, I think important for Ukraine and for NATO overall when it comes to America and the transatlantic relation, a very strong showing from Congress. I had meetings with two senators. They've been very, very outspoken, saying, look, the White House is one thing, but as Senator Ronson, he said this publicly, actually, he said, the Senate is known for killing good ideas, but actually it also kills bad ideas. And first of all, we have a full-fledged commitment to American troops in Europe, and they're actually putting a limit on withdrawals. And second of all, a full-fledged bipartisan commitment to Ukraine. And I think this was also a very, very important message to come from the legislature.
Marcin, thank you for showing that incredibly consequential concession that Ukraine has got from this summit. Kurt was obviously reading the body language well. And as Tanya was saying, this is becoming a very consequential summit indeed. It answered one of the questions we were asking at the beginning. Ukraine now with the ability, the permission, the approval to make its own Patriot missiles at home. While we've got you there, Marcin, quick question. President Erdogan has repeatedly said, and he's offered himself as a mediator for talks between Kyiv and Moscow to avoid further escalation in the Black Sea. You're talking about chatter and what you're hearing. Do people take that offer seriously? And of course, these things need to be negotiated at the end.
Look, I think everybody is happy that it's there. And by the way, if there's one also clear outcome of this summit, it's Turkey's success. And Erdogan has, let's say, played this very well. Even if the F-35s is not resolved yet, he is clearly coming out as a winner. But when it comes to potential role of Turkey in any kind of mediation, look, bottom line, everybody knows it's Putin's move. Nobody will fall for his games. He's trying very hard now to sow discord, to try to get Trump again back closer to his position. It doesn't seem that it's succeeding. Trump doesn't want to be played again in a negotiation process where, he's outsmarted and there's no progress. So unless Putin makes a move and then Turkey could become useful, they'll be on standby, let's say. But I think that everybody's clear. Now we need Ukraine to press their hand, continue doing what they're doing, and this is the best opportunity to Putin to come to his senses and come back to the negotiating table.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Let's just look ahead to the future now. We've got a good sense, I think, there of where we stand with this summit so far. Tanya Hartmann, if I could come back to you, where do you see NATO heading from here? Does this 5% of GDP from each of the members on defense and security by 2035 still stand? Are we going to be looking at greater European responsibility, or, surprise us, are we going to see a renewed US commitment to NATO?
I think actually that we are already seeing all of those. I think we are seeing greater European responsibility, a greater American commitment, and a much stronger NATO. What we're calling it is a stronger Europe in a stronger NATO. And I think when the Europeans are strengthening their defenses, their capabilities, it makes the entire alliance stronger. It makes the transatlantic bond stronger. And it makes all of us more capable not only to defend ourselves against the many challenges that we face, but also makes us more capable to support Ukraine. And here I want to highlight, just as we're kind of forward-looking portion of the concluding remarks, we have a window of opportunity. Ukraine is clearly pressing Russia, pressuring Russia, and so are all of us through sanctions, through pursuit of the shadow fleet and other mechanisms. And it's really important that we seize this window of opportunity, that we continue the flow of money to Ukraine and to the capabilities that Ukraine needs so that we can bring Russia to negotiation in good faith. I think this is where we have an important area of focus going forward, continuing the support to Ukraine, continuing to up the pressure, continuing to drive towards peace, because that's what the Ukrainian people want and that is what they deserve.
Tanya, thank you. Ambassador Volker, we'll come back to you now for more reading of body language. This time, we're going to ask you to assess the Russians. Of course, we've mentioned the increasing number of Ukrainian drones and missile strikes deep into Russian territory, the internet shutdowns, the fuel shortages. It was interesting, the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov saying on Tuesday that Russia would be closely monitoring the situation, the summit in Ankara. How do you think Moscow is going to read the outcome of this summit? We've just heard about those Patriot missiles.
Yeah, well, we always have to differentiate between what the Russians say and why they say it. And what the Russians are saying is they're watching this summit, they are not giving any ground. They still have their maximum demands. Putin called Trump ahead of the summit and said he's ready for peace. He's ready to, end the war. Of course, he's not. So there's all those things that the Russians say. What I think the Russians actually see and what they are trying to cover up for with these statements that they make is that NATO is more unified than they would like to see, than they would like to admit, that Ukraine is doing well. They're taking the war to Russia. They're seeing drones in the skies. They're seeing huge lines for gasoline. They're seeing their oil refining capacity be taken out in Omsk, of all places, so a couple thousand kilometers from the Ukrainian border. They're seeing that they can't really get their logistical supplies to Crimea anymore the way that they would need to sustain forces there. So they know that they are actually hurting. President Putin wants to bluff his way through this and keep the fight going. And he believes that he has an advantage in missiles in the short term. The drones, they get shot down, but the missiles get through, and that's going to hurt Ukraine. I don't think anybody else believes that that's going to have a strategic impact. It's going to cause suffering for Ukrainians that get hit, but it's not going to have a strategic impact. And with this licensing decision, it's going to take time. It's not going to produce a Patriot missile, this month or next month. But it is another signal to Putin that he has already passed his high water mark in what he's going to achieve in Ukraine. And the longer this goes on, the worse it gets for Russia. He's going to have to agree to a ceasefire at some point. He's just trying to figure out when and how and the timing and whether he can't still get something more before getting forced into that position.
Okay, well, one of the people presumably forcing him into that position will be President Trump. Let me turn to Ambassador Taylor now. Bill, do you expect American policy towards Europe and Ukraine to evolve after the congressional midterm elections coming up?
Mark, it's hard to say. The Congress has been very clear in its support for Ukraine and its opposition to Russia. Marcia just talked about the delegation there in Ankara. That's a demonstration of strong support for Ukraine. And you see the same thing in the American people. When you ask Americans if they support, when you ask Americans if assistance to Ukraine should go up, the answer is yes. So I think this will be reflected. This may be a direction that the administration will take, which of course is not going to change after November. But they'll take lessons. They'll notice what's going on. And if there is strong support for Ukraine based on the results of the election, I think they will recognize it. Maybe they recognize it right now as well. So I don't see the elections in November having a great effect, because the general direction of support is there.
So let's try and draw this all together with Arseniy. Thanks for that answer there, Bill. Arseniy, last Friday we all saw Putin filmed in military fatigues, meeting commanders where he was claiming victories on the front line and promising to take more territory. And yet we hear Trump saying at this Ankara summit that both Putin and Zelenskyy want the end of this war now. That was what President Trump was claiming, although we've heard him say those kinds of things in the past. What is your forecast for the months ahead, Arseniy?
Well, frankly, Mark, I don't have the crystal ball, but look, an overall optics is positive. Look, both the NATO Summit and G Summit had quite good positive mood. And the way things are unfolding right now is not the way Putin expected. Neither before Anchorage nor after Anchorage. So he lost the momentum. I mean, personally, Putin and his war criminals. It is really a huge deliverable. The US president greenlit an idea to provide licenses for Ukraine. And I fully share the take of Ambassador Volker, saying that, look, it is a huge step forward, but look, it takes time. And Putin still has an air dominance with the ballistic missiles. So that is the reason why we urgently need anti-ballistic missiles and Patriot systems as quick as possible. We actually got the commitment of our NATO allies and our NATO friends to provide billions of dollars in ammo and financial support. So it is not going the way Putin expected. But this is the war of attrition. And I won't exaggerate, Mark, saying that, look, we've reached the breaking point and we've turned the tide. Far from that. This war criminal hasn't changed his plans. So we need to turn the screw on him, to press like hell, to impose an additional sanctions, to have Americans in, the NATO in, and Russia out. You remember this motto for the NATO establishment.
Well, that's a very important place to end it, Arseniy. Thank you. I think we're nearly out of time, but really the mood in the room seems to be that there is a way to go, of course, but the momentum appears to be shifting in Ukraine's favor. Certainly, as a result of this summit, I think we could say that, although it's all coming at a great cost to Ukraine at the same time. I really just want to thank our panel, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, the former Prime Minister of Ukraine, of course, and Chairman of the Kyiv Security Forum. I've said it again, the chairman of the Kyiv Security Forum. Tanya Hartmann, head of policy east at the Political Affairs and Security Policy Division at NATO. It's been great to have you with us. Danylo Lubkivsky, former Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine, of course, and Security Council member at the Kyiv Security Forum. Ambassador Kurt Volker, lovely to see you, former US Special Representative for Ukraine. Ambassador William Taylor, too, former US Ambassador to Ukraine and a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council. It's been really good to hear your thoughts. And Marcin Buzansky, I should say.
Yes.
Executive Director of the Kyiv Security Forum's EU office in Brussels, joining us live from Ankara and giving us real-time updates, which has come, no doubt, as music to many Ukrainians' ears. Don't forget to subscribe to the Kyiv Security Forum page on YouTube for all these discussions, the latest videos and analysis of the unfolding situation in Ukraine. For now, though, do all keep safe, and thank you for watching our exclusive Kyiv Security Forum dive discussions. Thank you.